Hello everyone, Jacob here. Today we're going to focus on how to say momomo hagededa in English. In the last few lessons we've been talking about different ways to say this. We've talked about to get to verb, to come to verb, to find oneself ing, and today we're going to talk about to end up momomo, okay, which if you want to translate this a bit closer in Korean, it means 결국 momomo hagededa, okay? So we've been kind of focusing on the subtleties between all of these different ways to say momomo hagededa in English, and today I'm going to explain a little bit how end up momomo is a bit unique or specific for certain situations. So when do we use to end up? Basically, to talk about something that you do in the end, eventually, or finally. Okay? To end up is actually a verb, well, it's a phrasal verb. If you look it up in the dictionary, it will say to reach a final place or position. So if you're not sure what that means, I think I'm going to help you kind of understand that through a few examples. But basically, yeah, it's used really to talk about something that you do in the end, eventually, or finally. Okay. So first, let's look at how to use this structure to end up plus a preposition. Okay, plus a preposition plus a place. Okay, because if you look at the definition one more time, to reach a final place or position, we use this structure very often. So let's look at our first example related to this structure here. Our first example is pretty straightforward. I started at the bottom. I started at the bottom of the mountain. That's usually where you start. You start at the bottom of the mountain and ended up at the top. Okay, so that is the natural way to climb a mountain or to hike a mountain. You start at the bottom of the mountain and you end up at the top. Okay, so what does that mean? I ended up at the top. That's where I went in the end, eventually, finally. Okay, let's look at a second example. In our second example, also, you might have heard this before. Most criminals end up in jail. Yes, it's true. You should never become a criminal because most criminals end up in jail. So that's where they go in the end, eventually, finally. So we've looked already at this first structure, to end up plus a preposition. In both of these cases, you have the preposition at, in, and then a place, the top of the mountain, or jail. But now we're going to look at another really common way to use this to end up. So let's move on, let's go down. To end up, you can also put an ing verb after. So it makes this structure to end up plus verb ing, which I think is, really, really common, really commonly used in English. So let's look at our first example. I wanted to go to Japan. I wanted to go to Japan, but ended up traveling. I ended up traveling to China. Okay, so originally I wanted to go to Japan, but where did I go in the end? Where did I travel in the end, eventually or finally? I ended up traveling to China. Maybe there weren't enough airplane tickets to go to Japan, so I decided, okay, let's not go to Japan, let's go to China. I ended up traveling to China. Okay, let's look at one more example with an ing verb, and then we'll move on. The building ended up getting destroyed. The building ended up getting destroyed. So again, talking about what happened to the building in the end. In the end, it got destroyed. The building ended up getting destroyed. Maybe there was a war, or maybe they wanted to build a new building, so this original building ended up getting destroyed. Alright, so actually I think that these two usages, to end up with an ing verb, or like if we go back up, to end up with a preposition and then a place, these are definitely the most common ways to use this end up verb. But there are other ways that you can use this, so I just want to kind of go over those ways, and then we'll wrap up the lesson. So, how else can we use end up? You can say to end up plus an adjective. Okay, this is possible. To end up plus an adjective. It's not as common, but it is common. So I'm going to give you an example. I don't want to end up alone. I don't want to end up alone. Maybe if you're not married and you're getting a bit older, you might say this: oh, I don't want to end up alone. I'm scared of ending up alone. I'm worried I will end up alone. Don't worry. If you're thinking that, don't worry. I'm sure you will find someone to spend the rest of your life with and be happy with. But maybe you get stressed out or worried and you say this to yourself: oh, I don't want to end up alone. Okay? Another way that we can use this structure to end up, and I think this is going to be the last way that we use it today, you can actually put a noun after it. Okay? So this is also not as common, and you know, with an adjective or a noun, I have to think a little bit harder to find good examples because it's just not as common. It's not, you can't use it as much in as many situations, but it is possible. So again, I'm going to give you an example. My best friend ended up a thief. My best friend ended up a thief. So what does that mean? Again, in the end, maybe he wanted to be a businessman, but in the end, he became a thief. Eventually, he became a thief. He ended up a thief, which is kind of sad, but it's not true, so don't worry. My best friend did not end up a thief. He's doing fine. Don't worry about him. Just before we move on, I want to make sure that I do say one last thing. Often here, when we say ended up, you can put a noun directly right after, but often in between end up and the noun, you'll have becoming, okay? Or you'll have as. So in this example, you can put becoming right here. My best friend ended up becoming a thief is possible. So again, that's going back to this structure up here, you know, to end up ing. But you know, it is okay to just put a noun directly after. It depends a little bit on the sentence. Sometimes it's more natural to put becoming right here, or sometimes it's more natural to put as right here. But you don't always need it. Okay, so you can also say my best friend ended up as a thief, and that makes sense. Alright, so I know maybe right now you might be a little bit confused just because I've been talking about many ways to say momomo hage deda, but you know, what did we talk about? We talked about to get to verb, we talked about to come to verb, we talked about to find oneself doing something, and now we're talking about to end up doing something, or to end up momomo. And all of these are slightly different, and I've tried to make that really clear up here in this, you know, right after kind of introducing the topic. I made it clear, you know, in this part. But if you don't, you know, fully understand the subtle differences between all of these different structures, don't worry too much. Don't get too worried or don't get too stressed out because of this. Often, you know, you can use all three in the same sentence. But to be honest, if I were to recommend one out of to come to verb, to find oneself doing something, or to end up doing something, I would recommend this one just because I think it's a bit more common. Okay, it is a bit more common. It's used a bit more in conversation. So that's pretty much everything. Right before we wrap up, I just want to mention that sometimes we say to wind up doing something. Okay, and that basically has the same meaning. It's just another way to say to end up, to wind up, and it's used basically exactly the same way. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Keep watching, and I'll see you next time.